You're 31 years old, you've been saving for 6 years, watching your down payment finally reach $45,000, and instead of feeling proud, it just feels heavy. You find a $425,000 house, 3 bedrooms, decent neighborhood, and suddenly the pressure comes from every direction. Your real estate agent warns you rates could go higher. Your parents ask when you'll stop throwing money away on rent. Your friends who bought a few years ago post backyard photos and talk about equity like it was guaranteed. Late at night, you're still at the table, running the numbers again, feeling that quiet fear of falling behind. Because buying a home isn't just a financial decision, it's an emotional one, driven by pressure, comparison, and the need to feel like you're doing life the right way. And the thought that won't leave you alone is this: what if buying right now doesn't move you forward, but quietly locks you in? For most people, the pressure comes wrapped in a simple sentence they've heard their entire lives. If you're renting, you're throwing money away. It sounds obvious, almost responsible, like common sense passed down from one generation to the next. Renting is framed as temporary, irresponsible, something you're supposed to outgrow. Buying a home, on the other hand, is treated like a milestone, proof that you've made it, proof that you're building wealth, instead of watching your paycheck disappear every month. And once that idea gets into your head, it's hard to shake. Every rent payment starts to feel like a mistake. Every lease renewal feels like failure. You don't just feel behind financially, you feel behind socially. Because no one compares rent the way they compare homes. People don't brag about a great lease, but they love talking about equity, appreciation, and getting in before prices went crazy. Over time, that belief hardens into something dangerous. The idea that buying is always smart and renting is always dumb, no matter the numbers, no matter the timing, no matter the cost. But here's the part nobody slows down to question. What if that belief was shaped by a completely different market, a completely different economy, and a completely different set of rules than the one you're living in right now? What if the advice you're following made sense decades ago, but quietly breaks down under today's prices, today's mortgage rates, and today's reality? And once you start pulling on that thread, something uncomfortable happens. You realize the story isn't nearly as simple as you were told. The moment you actually slow down and look past the slogans, the rent versus buy conversation starts to change. Buying a home is almost always described as building equity, like every dollar you pay automatically turns into wealth. But that idea skips over a lot of what really happens. Equity sounds powerful, but equity is not the same as money you can actually use. When you own a home, a large portion of your monthly payment doesn't build anything at all. It doesn't grow, it doesn't compound, and it doesn't come back to you. It simply disappears, the same way rent does, just spread across different costs that feel more legitimate. Owning a home doesn't eliminate the idea of throwing money away, it just redirects it. Instead of paying a landlord, you're paying the bank, the government, insurance companies, and contractors every single month, just to stay in place. The house keeps its hand out whether the market is good or bad. And once you see that, the emotional certainty starts to crack. Because if buying automatically made people wealthy, there wouldn't be so many homeowners feeling cash poor and stressed despite technically owning their home. The real question isn't whether buying builds equity. It's how much money quietly disappears along the way, and whether that trade-off actually makes sense right now. The first place your money disappears as a homeowner is property taxes. And this is where the idea of ownership starts to feel misleading. You can pay off your mortgage, you can own the house outright, but the bill from the government never stops coming. Property taxes don't build equity, don't increase your net worth, and don't care how long you've lived there. They're simply the price of being allowed to keep the property in your name. Every year, a percentage of your home's value is taken quietly and permanently. And once that money is gone, it's gone for good. It doesn't come back when you sell. It doesn't compound over time. It doesn't make the house more valuable. You're not investing that money. You're renting the land from the government forever. And the uncomfortable part is that property taxes usually rise as home values rise, which means the win of appreciation comes with a higher recurring cost attached. This is one of those expenses people mentally ignore when they talk about homeownership, because it doesn't fit the story they like to tell. But when you strip away the emotion, property taxes behave exactly like rent. They're a required monthly payment that produces no lasting return, and they're the first reminder that owning a home doesn't mean your housing costs ever truly stop. The second place your money quietly disappears is maintenance. And this one hurts because it never feels optional. Roofs wear out, HVAC systems fail, water heaters die, pipes leak at the worst possible moment, and none of those repairs make you richer. Maintenance isn't an upgrade, it's a survival cost. You're not increasing the value of the home, you're just preventing it from falling apart. Every dollar you spend is there to hold the line, not move it forward. And the longer you own the house, the more these costs stack up. Unpredictable, unavoidable, and usually timed for when you least want to deal with them. This money doesn't build equity. It just buys you the right to keep living there without things breaking. Renters rarely think about this because it's invisible to them, but homeowners feel it constantly in sudden bills and slow drains on cash flow. And when you combine maintenance with property taxes, a pattern starts to form. There's a steady stream of money leaving every month that looks a lot like rent, even though you own the place. But as big as these costs are, they still aren't the most expensive part of homeownership. That comes from something far less obvious and far more misunderstood. The biggest cost of homeownership isn't something you get a bill for each month, which is exactly why most people underestimate it. It's the cost of locking your money up. When you put a large down payment into a house, that money doesn't disappear, but it does lose its freedom. Once it's locked into the walls of a house, it stops working for you. It can't be easily accessed, it can't be rebalanced, and it can't take advantage of opportunities elsewhere. Historically, money invested in the stock market has grown faster over time than home values, and that gap matters more than most people realize. Even when returns are lower than the long-term average, the difference still exists. And on top of that, you're paying mortgage interest on the portion you didn't put down, especially painful in a high-rate environment. You're paying the bank for the privilege of borrowing, while simultaneously missing out on what that money could have been earning elsewhere. This combination quietly adds up year after year, and most homeowners never calculate it because it doesn't feel like a payment. But it is. It's a cost, just like taxes and maintenance, except it's invisible. And when you finally add all of these pieces together, something surprisingly simple emerges. A shortcut that cuts through the emotion and shows you what homeownership actually costs. When you add everything up, the picture finally sharpens. Property taxes quietly gone, maintenance quietly gone, the cost of tying up your money, the interest you're paying at today's mortgage rates. None of these feel dramatic on their own, but together they form a pattern. That pattern is what the 7% rule captures. It's not a prediction, and it's not a trick. It's a shortcut that tells you how much owning a home actually costs you every year in money you'll never get back. Take the home price, multiply it by 7%, then divide by 12. That's your monthly break-even rent, not your mortgage payment, your real cost of ownership. When people hear this number for the first time, it usually makes them uncomfortable because it reframes the entire decision. Suddenly, owning doesn't look like an automatic upgrade from renting. It looks like a trade-off. If you can rent a similar place for less than that number, renting isn't throwing money away. It's the financially superior choice. And if ownership costs less than rent, then buying can make sense. The power of the 7% rule is that it removes emotion from a decision people usually make under pressure. It doesn't care what your parents think, what your friends did, or what a real estate agent wants. It just shows you the math. And when you apply that math to today's market, the results are hard to ignore. When you apply the 7% rule to the housing market right now, especially in 2026, the gap becomes obvious. Mortgage rates are still sitting in the low 6% range, far above the levels that made buying a no-brainer a few years ago. Home prices, meanwhile, aren't crashing, but they aren't surging either. Growth is slow, uneven, and in many areas barely keeping up with inflation. That combination is brutal for affordability. High rates inflate the true cost of ownership, while modest price growth limits the upside people are counting on. At the same time, rents have cooled from their peak. In many markets, rent growth has slowed to a pace closer to inflation, and in some places, rents have even come down. That shift matters because it changes the math. For the first time in a long time, renting isn't just the cheaper monthly option, it's the more flexible one. You're not locking yourself into today's rates. You're not betting on appreciation to bail out a high purchase price. You're buying time. And time has value in a market that's still trying to find its footing. This is where the old advice starts to fall apart, because it assumes conditions that no longer exist. The decision that made sense in 2019 or 2020 doesn't automatically make sense now. And that's why the right answer today depends less on tradition and more on timing. Buying a home can still make sense, even in this environment, but the conditions have to be right. If you're planning to stay put for a long time, not just a few years, the transaction costs and short-term swings matter less. A large down payment can lower both your mortgage balance and the interest you pay, shifting the math in your favor. And if rates eventually fall meaningfully, the ability to refinance can change the picture. For some people, the non-financial benefits are worth paying for. Stability, control over your space, the ability to customize without permission, and the comfort of knowing you won't be forced to move all have real value. But those benefits aren't free. They come with higher upfront costs, less flexibility, and more responsibility. The mistake is assuming those trade-offs automatically make sense for everyone at every point in time. Buying isn't a badge of financial intelligence. It's a situational decision. And when the situation isn't right, forcing it can quietly do more harm than good. Which brings us to the side of homeownership that rarely shows up in spreadsheets, but weighs heavily on people once the excitement wears off. The hidden cost of owning a home isn't just financial, it's psychological. Once you buy, you're locked in. Moving for a better job, a healthier lifestyle, or a new opportunity suddenly feels expensive and complicated. Every problem becomes your problem. A burst pipe at 2 a.m. isn't an inconvenience, it's a responsibility. Your wealth becomes concentrated in a single asset, in a single location, tied to a single market you can't easily escape. That lack of flexibility creates pressure people don't anticipate when they're signing the papers. Even when nothing goes wrong, the weight is still there. The feeling that too much of your life is tied to one decision. Renting, by comparison, trades ownership for optionality. You're buying freedom, mobility, and the ability to adapt when circumstances change. Neither choice is perfect, but pretending ownership has no cost beyond the mortgage is how people end up feeling trapped by something they thought would make them feel secure. And once you acknowledge that trade-off honestly, the final decision becomes clearer. Not because someone told you what to do, but because the numbers and the reality finally line up. At the end of the day, this decision isn't about proving anything to anyone else. Renting is not failure, and buying is not success. Both options involve money that disappears every month. The only difference is how much and whether it makes sense for your life right now. The mistake people make is treating homeownership like a moral upgrade instead of a financial trade-off. The math doesn't care what year your parents bought their house. It doesn't care what your friends locked in during a completely different market. It only cares about today's prices, today's rates, and your situation. Take the home price, multiply it by 0.07, divide by 12, and compare it to rent. That number cuts through the noise in about 30 seconds. If renting is cheaper, renting is the smarter move. If owning is cheaper, then buying can make sense. Ignore the pressure, ignore the guilt, and ignore anyone who gets paid when you say yes. The smartest financial decisions are usually the quiet ones, the ones nobody applauds, but your bank account feels years later. So before you rush into a 6-figure commitment because you're afraid of falling behind, run the numbers yourself. Do it with today's reality, not yesterday's advice. Your future self will care a lot more about that than whether you owned a house by a certain age.